Before we get started, a little bit of housekeeping for you. If you hear kind of a little whirring noise on the soundtrack here, it's because it's hot here in the studio and the fan's on. The fan's overhead, but I've got it on its lowest setting, so hopefully it's not going to be too disruptive. But if it wasn't on, it would be very disruptive for me because, as I say, it's hot in here. Anyway, in this mini-series, we're going to talk about an artist who's been called an American treasure. And his music and his band have been called the saviors of the doldrums of rock and roll in the 70s. And he sold over 80 million records worldwide, making him one of the world's best-selling artists of all time. I've been waiting to do this one for a long time, and we're finally getting around to running down the dream. We're going to study the music of Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers and Tom Petty without the Heartbreakers over the decades. So let's begin. Let's drop the needle. Tom Petty grew up in a working-class family in a part of Gainesville, Florida that wasn't very prosperous. And Tom was into sports in school, but as he says, he never was really into it. But then when Tom was 10 years old, something magical happened to him, which changed his life forever. It turns out his uncle was working on a movie set, which was being shot not far from Gainesville. And the movie was called Follow That Dream, and it was starring Elvis Presley. And so Tom's uncle said to young Tom, "Hey, do you want to come along and see how they make movies?" And Tom went, and he got to meet Elvis Presley, and it made an indelible impression on young Tom Petty. But then he saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, and something just clicked in that he knew he wanted to be in a band. And as he said later, it looked like it was fun. You get a bunch of your friends together and you make music. It showed me a way out, and I wanted to do it. And boy, did he ever. Tom got a guitar, and with his friend Benmont Tench, who played piano, they formed a group. Tom was 14 and Benmont was only 11. Then a few years later in 1970, Tom got together with his friend Mike Campbell and Tom Leedon. Now, Tom Leedon turns out to be the brother of Bernie Leedon, who, of course, was in the Eagles at this time. And so they form a group which they call Mudcrutch. Tom Petty played bass and sang. Tom Leedon played guitar and sang. Jim Lanahan was their lead vocalist. And Randall Marsh played drums. And then Mike Campbell was on guitar. At first, Jim Lanahan, as their lead vocalist, sang most of their songs, but eventually and gradually, Tom Petty started taking over singing lead. And one of the songs that Petty wrote and became their first single was called Up in Mississippi. It was released locally in Florida in 1971. But changes were coming for Mudcrutch, because in 1972, both Leedon and Lanahan decided to leave the group. They're replaced by Danny Roberts on bass guitar, and he sang some. And then they brought back their old friend, Benmont Tench, to play keyboards. Mudcrutch played all around Gainesville and Central Florida, and they became pretty popular. And they even hosted their own music festival at a little farm that a bunch of them lived at out of town, and they called it the Mudcrutch Festival. But they knew in order to make it big, they needed to be in Los Angeles. So they packed up all their stuff in a dilapidated old vehicle, started to drive to LA, and immediately broke down just outside of Gainesville. So a number of adventures later, they do show up in LA and start making the rounds around record companies. However, all they got were rejections, until they went to a little independent record label called Shelter Records. And Shelter decided, maybe there's something there. Now, there's an interesting backstory about Shelter Records. It was formed by Leon Russell, of course, that great artist that came out of Tulsa, Oklahoma, and was a big hit and getting bigger at this time. He got together with a friend of his who was an English producer called Denny Cordell. And Denny had actually came to fame the first time producing the Moody Blues. So together, they decide they're going to create a record company, and they're going to call it Shelter Records. And they're going to have two operations. Leon will take care of the one in Tulsa, and Denny Cordell will run the one in L.A. So Denny Cordell was the head of Shelter Records that Tom Petty and Mudcrutch went to see in L.A. Now, when Shelter Records started, of course, they needed a logo. So Leon and Denny hit on this idea of making their logo an egg with the logo printed on the side of the egg, and the logo was going to be an upside-down S, which was actually the Superman logo turned upside down. So that was their logo until DC Comics, who owns Superman, saw it. And so they went to sue Shelter Records. So quickly the logo changed. The first idea was, just put a black band over the Superman logo. And so that's what they did. And they used that for a while. And then it changed again, where they decided they would just hand scrawl an S on the egg. In 1975, Mudcrutch released their first single on Shelter Records, and it was called Depot Street. But it didn't go anywhere. And Denny Cordell was quite upset, and he decides that a change is necessary. So he fires Mudcrutch, but tells Tom Petty that he'll give Tom a solo career if Tom will sign with him as a solo artist. So Mudcrutch disbands and splinters, and Tom stays in L.A., but he quickly realizes, man, I really want to be in a band. So the first thing he does is he calls his friend Mike Campbell to join him again. And quickly then after, Benmont Tench joins. And then Tom decides to tap on two musicians he knew from back in Gainesville, Stan Lynch, who played drums and sang, and Ron Blair, who played bass. This then became the Heartbreakers. And so that's the story about how Tom Petty from Gainesville, Florida, followed his dream after being inspired by watching Elvis make that movie in Florida. He followed his dream all the way out to California. But there were hiccups along the way, and Mudcrutch was a casualty of that. But now, finally, we have the Heartbreakers. And boy, are they about to explode on the scene. In our next episode, we'll take a look at the early days of the Heartbreakers. It's going to be a wild ride, and not necessarily always a smooth one either. Thanks for watching, and till next time, keep it rockin'. If you liked this episode, hit the like button, and you can also leave me a comment down below, and I'll respond to you. If you subscribe, we'll let you know when future episodes come out.